What up, everybody? It's another night of talking Vikings history, vintage Vikings history. Tonight we will be discussing head coaches in Vikings history. Why? Because there's only 10 of them. And we will count you down from the worst, we all know who those two are, to the best. Well, there is only one best out there. So we will let you guys, in the discussion, to have your own opinions.
Skol Vikings, let's win this game. Skol Vikings, honor your name. Go get that first down, then get a touchdown. Rock 'em, sock 'em, fight, 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 fight. Go Vikings, run out the score. You'll hear us yell for more. Vikings, Skol Vikings, let's go.
Well. Welcome, everybody. By the way, these gorgeous faces, we don't need makeup. Right, Tony?
Exactly.
So we discussed it. You have a number 10. We each have number 10. We each had a number 9, but we decided to go ahead and just do dual number 9s instead of doing 1 through 10.
Right. I didn't include the current head coach.
Right.
He needs time.
Yeah.
So I think I got everybody
But
on the list.
this
I don't think I
was-
forgot anybody.
Yeah. So this is your worst choice for head coach.
Okay. That's my guy. No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's
It's not coming
not.
up? There you
Yep.
go. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So that's your choice.
yes.
Worst coach ever.
And the only reason I make him the worst is because, Les Steckel had 1 year, and they let him go. This guy had, what did he have? He had 6 years, didn't he?
Yeah, he was. Let me see.
2006 to 2010.
I think 10 was definitely his last year.
Yeah, he got fired right after they lost to the Packers badly. I mean, they got just trounced, and he was fired. And he also had just released Randy Moss without telling ownership and without getting ownership's permission to release Randy Moss. He went ahead and cut Randy Moss, and then he got fired that following Monday. I forget the date right offhand.
Yep, he was from 2006 to 2010.
Okay.
He went 42 and 38 overall, but if you take away the 09 year,
He's
which,
average.
it's hard to say take away the 09 year.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of, if you take away that 1 year, then it's he's pretty bad.
Yeah, he had average years, average 10 years. He was also one of those coaches. He came in and he was touted as this offensive guru, and he came in and started calling the plays, and he was terrible. He was terrible at it. His kick-ass offense didn't exactly kick anybody's ass.
Not until he got Favre.
Not until he got Favre. And I think a lot of people forget this. Just 2007, I think it was the 4th game of the year. We played the Detroit Lions, and this is 2007. The crowd at the Metrodome was already chanting "Fire Childress" during the game. It was all, you could hear it loud and clear on TV. The crowd was chanting "Fire Childress." This is 2007. So
Which doesn't happen a lot here.
No, he never endeared himself to us, I guess. He never endeared himself. And then when I found out how he was hired, I was kind of like, okay, kind of karma, with the way he got hired. And this is, once again, this was the Wilfs, the current owners. This was their first hire as a head coach. This was their first hire, was Brad Childress, and the quickest.
Yeah, it did go very well. I don't know. Maybe they thought, obviously, they thought it would go better because he's supposed to be an offensive guru, quarterback guru.
Hmm.
Look what he did with Donovan McNabb in Philly. But as time gone on, we realized that was Andy Reid.
That was Andy Reid. Yeah, that was
Uh,
all Andy Reid.
yeah, his numbers really are not that great. When you look at when you look at his when you look at his numbers, they really aren't that good as a head coach. That's why in our list he's ranked so low. Yes, he did go to an NFC Championship game, but when you look at his records as the head coach of the Vikings, 2006 he was 6-10, 8-8 and 07. He was 10-6 in 08, which I don't know how he did that. You know, then in 09 he was 12-4. Of course, that was with the fall. That was the Favre year.
That was the Favre year. Yep.
And then he was 3-7 before he got fired. Um, he was 1-2 as the head coach of the Vikings in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So that goes back to that. The only that one that when he had was in the 09 playoffs against with the Cowboys, I think.
Yeah, they actually beat the
yeah.
Cowboys like 34-3.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so which I enjoyed. But
Yeah.
but
anytime we beat I went to the auto parts store yesterday, and of course the guy had the Cowboys. He's like, "When's the last time the Vikings won the Super Bowl?" I said, "When can you guys get a new argument?"
yeah, when's the last time you
I mean,
got when's the
yeah.
last time the Cowboys were relevant?
And I was looking in the room. I'm like, I was looking around. I go, "You and I were the only two that were alive last time they won one." So
Right.
but
Right.
yeah, it's just. So I'm happy every time we beat the Cowboys. So
Yeah.
So that's the reason why we have Brad Childress so low on our list. I had him 9. Tony had him 10. So we couldn't decide who was the worst. So we just kind of made a double 9. Yeah. So let's see who come with it. Of course, we got the usual suspects here. We got T-Bass. We got Davy Chains. My mom's is back in here. Appreciate you, Mom. So yeah. So we got 6. Go ahead and hit that like button.
Yeah.
Really helps out the channels. We're trying to build this network here. So anytime you guys hit the like and subscribe button, it really helps us out. So here's my coach. What's that?
Davey did ask a question. I think he was asking a question about that Packer game in 2010. Did the Packers convert all their fourth downs in a game in the Packers game? I think they did. I think the Packers, if they were gonna, I think they had already run up 31 points late in the game and decided to punt. But I think the Packers had went for it on like fourth down on every time and made it. So I think that's
it would surprise me.
Game. Yeah, that was the 2010 game, and that was a game where at that time the Packers were starting their little drive. They won the Super Bowl that year, so they were starting their momentum towards the playoffs. Yeah, I think that might have been it, and that was a Leslie Frazier defense,
which also he's pretty low on this list too.
Right.
At the time, I was happy that they hired Leslie Frazier. I thought it would work out. I thought it would work out better for him.
And Frazier was that next big name assistant head coach that was on the to get a head coaching job. His name kept coming up, so you kind of had no choice but to hire him. You really didn't.
So this is my pick for the worst coach in Vikings history.
Okay.
Mr. Steckel. I know he only had one bad year, but that year was, other than probably their first year, I'd probably say it was worse than their first year, because at least their first year they had a win against the Bears that they shouldn't have. That year that he was a head coach was probably the worst in Vikings history.
Oh, God, I remember that was my senior year in high school. It started out bad. Well, first of all, Bud resigned out of the blue. He retired out of the blue. And so he retires, and they name Les Steckel as the head coach. And I'm saying to myself, what about Jerry Burns? That was the first thing out of my mouth. I figured if when Bud retired, he would give the job to Les Steckel. He would give the job to Jerry Burns and not Les Steckel, but they gave it to Steckel. The reason being he's younger. They kind of wanted to get a new kind of attitude with this team at that time. But Les, you talk about in over your head. That was Les Steckel.
Yeah. They went 3-13. That was the first time since the merger that the
Mhm.
Vikings had a record that bad. They allowed 484 points. It's a 30.3 per game average. It was the most in the NFL by any team between 83 and 2000. It was the most any Vikings team allowed in one season. And at the time, it was the third most allowed in a 16-game season. Only the 81 Colts and the Saints in 1980 allowed more.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty bad season. I don't know if he was considered an offensive guy or a defensive guy, but
Steckel was, I believe, he was our receivers coach. So, and I think when he left the Vikings, he went to New England, and I believe he was their receivers coach. Yes, one of the worst games, Davey Chains, was they beat us. The 49ers beat us 51-7 that year. And like the last 3 or 4 games of the year, the Vikings had given up 31 points to their opponents at halftime.
Yeah, so the wins that they had were by a combined total of 7 points.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
No,
it was 7, 1, 8. So 9 points. 8 points.
Because they beat Atlanta
27-20. That was their biggest win of the year.
Right. Their biggest win of the year was 27-20 against Atlanta. The next week, they beat Detroit by 1, 29-28.
And then they beat the Buccaneers by 3.
Yeah, and then you beat the Buccaneers.
So it's 11 points total that they won their 3 wins by. When you configure that with the losses that they have, the only games they were really in that they lost was probably 2 games maybe. The Bucs, they lost 20-20, 31-35, and then they lost 17-19 to the Eagles.
And that Philadelphia game, the Vikings were winning 17-12. The Vikings had stopped them on a 4th down. This ticked off everybody. The Vikings stopped them on a 4th down. All of a sudden, the referee threw a flag for a phantom face mask. The game was over. The referee threw a flag for a phantom face mask, which would give the Eagles 1 shot at a touchdown. And sure enough, they converted it to win that game. They won it 19-17. And it was on a phantom face mask. There was no face mask.
They were 22nd in passing offense, 18th in rushing offense. They're 25th in total. They were 26th in passing defense, 27th in rush defense for 28. Well, you're not going to win very many games if you're 25th in offense and 28.
No, and for a couple of years there, Bud had it in 83, and then Les also got part of it in 84. This team had an injury issue. They had injuries up and down the roster, and most of it was the veterans. 84, Doug Martin, defensive lineman, he held out, and so he missed most of training camp, but then he came back, but then he comes back and he gets hurt. Mark Mullaney gets hurt. Matt Blair started the season on IR. Then some veterans were cut. James White was cut. Ricky Young was cut. Rick Danmeyer was cut. Randy Holloway, defensive lineman, he had 5 sacks. I think he still has the record. He had 5 sacks in the 84 game against the Falcons. And 2 or 3 weeks later, Les Steckel waived him. Your best pass rusher, he waived him. Then they had a promising young wide receiver, Dwight Collins. He went AWOL in the middle of the season. So it was one of those years. You had 3 quarterbacks, Tommy Kramer, Wade Wilson, and Archie Manning playing quarterback, lining up behind center.
The Vikings traded draft picks to get.
Yes, they did. And the worst, if you talk about Archie Manning having a really bad career and getting sacked a lot, you watch that. If you ever get a chance to see the first time we played the Bears, we played them at Chicago in Soldier Field in '84. Archie Manning was sacked 11 times and he took a beating. It was actually, I felt bad for the guy. He took a beating in that game. Why Steckel left him in there for so long is beyond me. But he left him in there, and
Dill was bad, but he had to be good enough to at least play that game to save.
Well, Dills he traded Dills 5 games into the regular season. They traded Dills to the Rams. So, and Dills was the quarterback the year before after when Tommy got hurt. But yeah, it was one of those years that if you're a Viking fan, you just wanted to forget. And like I said, it was my senior year, so I remember it well. But yeah, his one and only year, and deservedly so, his one and only year.
Yeah, they drafted Robert Smith, the defensive end, that year.
Yeah, Big Bird Smith. That was also the year they drafted Keith Millard. Keith Millard was our number 1 pick. Millard signed with the USFL. He did not sign with the Vikings. Oh yeah, the boot camp, T-Bass. I remember the boot camp. That whole.
Well, can you imagine that now today?
Oof. Oh, geez.
Him trying to do that. If it was extreme in '84, I can only imagine what it would be like today.
Oh, they get
because he tried to run it like a military boot camp.
Yes, he did. Right? Yes, he did. You'll probably get OSHA involved nowadays.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. 1978.
Yeah.
Yep, 1978. Bud was livid. Matter of fact, the whole team was livid. Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, so that '84 season, I know it was only one season, but it was a pretty bad season.
Right.
So the next on the list, he's well liked. Everybody likes this guy. But I mean, was he ready to be the head coach? I don't know. But he was damn fun to watch as a head coach.
Yeah.
So, I mean, former Viking as a player, be a head coach. He played quarterback in college, I think, which is...
Yeah, he played in Maryland. He was a quarterback, yeah.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that. But, yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. I don't want to say he got hosed. He got mistreated. I mean, it was kind of sad that he had to find out from his son that he got fired, not from the Wolves directly. That kind of leads into the story I know you want to tell about Tice's firing. But yeah, that's pretty. The way they hired his firing was not very good. I was disappointed with the way the Wolves handled his firing.
And part of that is karma, because of the way that Mike Tice was hired. Let's go back. After the 2000 championship game, the Vikings get beat 41-0. At that time, head coach Denny Green and owner Red McCombs were not talking at all. They weren't talking to each other. He wouldn't give McCombs any information about what's going on with the team, and he told his coaches and players to not talk to them about it, about what's going on in the locker room. Red was finding out what was going on anyway. And how was Red finding out? He had a spy. That spy's name was Mike Tice. So Mike Tice was telling Red McCombs everything that was going on in the locker room, everything that was going on with Denny as far as the coaches and the players and all that stuff. This was the year that Corey Stringer passed away in training camp also. So there was a lot of tension.
R.I.P. BK.
There was a lot of tension with that team. So when the Vikings were heading into their final game again in Baltimore, the Vikings were going to fire Denny. Red McCombs was going to fire Denny before that last game. Denny didn't give him the chance. Denny resigned. So they named Mike Tice the interim HC for that game, and then McCombs gave him the title permanently. But you also got to remember, Red McCombs at that time was not spending any money on this team.
No,
he wasn't. So
because he wanted the stadium.
He wanted a stadium.
And he didn't want to pay for any of the part of the stadium at all. He wanted to be 100% taxpayer funded, which you can't have that.
Right.
It's not a college stadium where it's publicly owned and stuff like that. You just can't.
Right.
Can't do that. Plus, Mike Tice also had that Super Bowl ticket scandal as well.
Yeah, and the player that narked on him for that was Chris Hovan.
Yeah.
That was Chris Hovan. So, he was kind of a meathead as a coach, but he had really nothing to work with. But that's the same year that he did have under his watch, Dante Culpepper almost became NFL MVP.
Yeah.
Only quarterback that was better than him was Peyton Manning. We could run the ball. The offensive line was always good. The way we lost some games, like in 2003, we get knocked out of the playoffs by that one
Nate Poole.
He beat the Packers in Green Bay during the playoffs. He beat Brett Favre in the playoffs in Green Bay. So he did a lot of good things, but then, the boat scandal hit. Randy Moss got traded, and it was eventually time to move on.
We think the Vikings are undisciplined now. They were very undisciplined there.
Oh God, they were. Yeah, it was a free for all with that team. It was a free for all.
I think it was San Antonio. I know definitely he wanted to move him to San Antonio.
He wanted to move him to San Antonio. The Oilers had already moved to Tennessee, so the only other option was he wanted to move the team to his hometown of San Antonio, which is Cowboy territory, and we knew that was never going to happen.
And trust me, there's Red McCombs stuff everywhere here.
Yeah.
So,
Red McCombs at the time he owned Clear Channel, which in the Twin Cities was basically had every radio station, which is why the Vikings ended up on the current station in Twin Cities that they're on now. They went back because at that time McCombs owned it and he owned the team, so he put.
They were on CCO before that, right?
Yes, they were on CCO for years. They were on CCO, the good neighbor as they call it. But they were on CCO, and there's a reason they left. There's a reason.
Yep, Davey. There's
a reason that they left K-Fan in the first place, and it's got a lot to do with a coach that we'll talk about later.
And then, I don't know if I was really excited about Tice to be the head coach, but
I was never excited about him. I'm just like, really? This isn't.
He was too honest in the press conferences.
Yeah,
like we're gonna have the Randy ratio 25-1. Well, everybody knows there's a Randy ratio, but you just ain't got to say it.
Right. Well, then I remember this one presser he did. I think it was we were going to play the Rams in 2002. It's like, they're a good football team. They got good football players. They got good football coaches. They play really good football. I'm just like, really, Mike? This is, my God.
Yeah. What up, Norpheus? Yes, real quick. The streak is dead. Royce Lewis.
What was the final?
It was 3-1.
Okay.
2 home runs by Royce Lewis. He drove in all 3 runs. Now, the one run that the Blue Jays got, Pablo Lopez threw a strike right down the middle, and the umpire called it a ball. On the next pitch,
that doesn't surprise me.
Blue Jays scored. So
that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome, Norpheus. You're one of the regulars. We appreciate you guys for watching. So that brings us to, we think our head coach is laid back now. This has got to be the most laid back coach we've ever had in Vikings history. People called him stoic. I don't know if you would call him stoic or not, but he definitely was not a rah-rah guy. I don't know if he was considered a quiet disciplinarian, but I think coaches have to be fired every now and again, and I never saw him get up and get fiery. Maybe I missed it. I don't know. I don't remember it.
He was laid back. Leslie Frazier was kind of that cool school of coaching. He didn't let his emotions get too high or too low. He had a veteran team, which is why he probably felt he didn't have to really do a lot. I mean, he had, especially on the defensive side of the ball, he had veterans. The problem was offense. And he had, let's face it, the poor guy got stuck with Christian Ponder. You know, when you get up to the podium and you're basically telling everybody that Christian Ponder gives us our best chance to win, basically you're just a management puppet.
Well, in his defense, McNabb was throwing worm burners. No worm was safe for McNabb that year.
Well, remember that year. Now, this is what people forget. This. Remember, they didn't really have a training camp because of the player lockout.
Yeah.
So he never had any kind of off season or nothing. When we got McNabb, he just kind of threw him in there and let him play.
And Ponder was supposed to sit behind McNabb for a year and then take over.
Right.
So Ponder played before he was ready.
Right. And so it was just such a cluster bomb that, you know, it was bound to fall apart. And you still were kind of getting off the remnants of what Childress had did.
Yeah.
So
one extreme to the other.
Right.
Because even Childress was kind of not emotional either, but he was kind of more of a dictator than what Leslie Frazier was.
Yeah. What and he lost. What happened was, from what I was told, Childress had lost the locker room. He lost that locker room. Yeah. He lost the locker room probably even before. Once it got Favre up here, that kind of saved his job. It did save his job. He got an extension out of it. But he had lost the players a few years earlier. So
same thing happened with Zimmer.
Yeah, exactly.
Once you lose the players as a coach, your goose is cooked.
Once you lose that locker room, it's a wrap. It's a wrap.
But the reason why Frazier is above Childress is because I don't think it was as disastrous as him being the head coach as it was Childress. They didn't have a lot to work with when he was the head coach.
Right. And you talk about the Wilfs spending money and willing to spend money. The Wilfs went out there and got good players for Childress. They did. But the Wilfs also had another itinerary too. They wanted butts in the seats because they also wanted a stadium. So they had that kind of like they were doing the same things too. That's why they got Favre. Favre was here to sell tickets. They brought Randy back to sell tickets. So, you know, it was kind of they were in that boat. This was a gold mine as far as land development goes, and the Wilfs are land developers, and they succeeded. They succeeded.
So Frazier was 12-32-1 as the head coach. He was 0-1 in the postseason, but you got to keep in mind that postseason game that he coached, Ponder got hurt. He had to start Joe Webb. We had no chance of winning that game with Joe Webb as the starter.
We probably had no chance winning it with Ponder either, but
it would have been more competitive. I think.
Would have been more competitive, and they lost 24-10 that game, so they didn't get blown out. They just had no offense.
Yeah, the defense was pretty good that year. He went. 5-10, 10-6, 3-13. Of course, 6 games in to the 2010 season. He went 3-3.
3-3, yeah.
Yeah. But it was I mean, he's had a long career. So,
Mm-hmm.
but,
Is he still in Buffalo as their DC?
yeah, he's still in Buffalo.
Okay.
They probably don't want him there.
Yeah,
but
I don't think he will probably get another HC job. I think he'll probably retire now. He is up there. So, but yeah, I mean, and he came in and he had to pick up the pieces for Childress. He had to fix that.
Yeah, so they were basically 2.5 seasons, and what he was left with when he took over compared to what Brad Childress has is way different. So that's why we give Frazier a little bit more respect than Brad Childress, because Frazier, I think, was a stopgap to stabilize the franchise.
Yes.
I think that's more. I don't think they had permanent visions of him being a long-term head coach. If it did work out, it worked out. But I think he was brought in because he's so laid back and stoic, as they say. I think that he was brought in to stabilize the franchise.
And I want to say, I think Leslie's last year, as a matter of fact, 2013, may have been 2012, was voted in. The Wilfs got their stadium.
Yeah.
So Leslie was the last coach at the Metrodome, and then they tore down the Metrodome and built US Bank. But yeah,
I guess Frazier took the year off, according to Norpheus.
Which year?
This year, I think.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Are you talking about this year, Norpheus? I think you are. Yeah, I think this was a comment about Frazier. The players did play for Frazier. He was definitely a player's coach.
Yeah, he had veterans. On his team. The Jared Allens, the Kevin Williams, the Brian Robinsons, he had other ones too, the Sullivans, and he had Lode Holt. They all liked him. They all liked Chad Greenway. They all liked him.
You can like the head coach, but if he's not a very good head coach, he's just not a very good head coach.
Right.
So I mean, so that's why we kind of give him the little bit more of the benefit of the doubt than we do Childress. I personally, I don't like Childress. I mean, he had that one really good year. That's why I put him above Steckel.
Right.
Because Steckel's 1 year was awful, but as I pointed out, Childress's years over the longer run were worse.
Right. Here's the thing about when Childress came up here. The Wilfs had just got the team in the year before, so the Wilfs wanted to put their stamp on this team, but they changed everything so drastically and quickly that they wanted nothing to do with the past, and I just from the uniforms to the way the team was run, especially, and how the team is presented, it really was just kind of like it hit you fast, and the changes were so fast and sudden that it's just like, what is going on here? This isn't the same Viking team.
Yeah, those uniforms they had like during the 09-10 seasons, they were awful.
Yeah.
They were awful. I like the ones they have now, not as well as I like the old school ones.
Yeah, when they made
the ones they have now.
When they made that drastic change with the uniforms, and they had the presentation out at the Mall of America, and they unveiled the uniforms. I looked up at that stage. I'm like, what the hell are those high school uniforms that this team is wearing?
Yeah,
I hated them. They reminded me of a high school team.
Well, it still goes back to that style, because like the Broncos are still wearing those uniforms.
I can't stand
the Panthers are still wearing those uniforms.
I can't stand
it. Arizona uniforms, they may be plain, but they're better than what they had before.
Those Arizona uniforms are nice, especially in person. The all white ones are nice. If you put those Arizona pants with the red unis that they wear, perfect. Perfect. They look kind of like Ohio State.
That's what people said when they first came out with it. But the Broncos uniforms are hideous. The helmet logo is okay, but the uniforms themselves are hideous.
Unfortunately, we're stuck with Nike doing the uniforms, and they're always going to find a way to screw that up. Yeah, the Wilfs did have legal problems back in New Jersey, Davy Chains. They got sued by an old business partner, and that business partner won. He won.
Yeah, they did. Yep. Yeah. Was it rent or something, or they didn't pay their partner or something like that?
They didn't pay their partner in a land
Yeah,
development scheme. They didn't pay their partner.
which is a huge no-no
Yeah.
in that type of field.
Yep.
But I want to bring up this comment right here. Let me go back to, I think it was T-Bass, or was it Davy Chains? That was Davy. Because this is the next guy on our list.
Oh, Storm and Norm.
I was trying to find a good picture of him not being drunk or crazy. This was like the best one I could see, but you can still kind of see he's a little bit drunk in this.
Good luck with that one.
You
Good
talk
luck with
about
that
a
one.
curmudgeon. Oh my gosh.
Mm. And he
Man.
was, when they decided on him, he was not their ownership at the time. And the GM, he was not their first selection. The first guys they had at the top of that list to be the first head coach of the Vikings were Bud Grant and Eric Parsekian, but both were successful where they were. So they brought in Norm Van Brocklin, who, by the way, had just won an NFL championship with the Philadelphia Eagles. He beat the Packers. So they brought him in, but he was he had no business being an NFL head coach. Some of the stories I heard from the older players, his unorthodox way of coaching. Mick Tingeloff told a story years ago. They were playing, he forgot who they were playing, but on the first play of the game, he wanted the entire team at the snap of the ball to slug the player in front of him. Didn't matter who it was, just throw a punch at him. He said they can only throw one 15-yard flag, just slug him.
It does make sense. They get like that one flag. But they can also eject your ass too.
Yeah, and it didn't work because they jumped off sides or something like that. But yeah, it was the training camps were really hard. But he really didn't know anything about coaching. So he was in over his head, and his volatile relationship with Fran Tarkenton. That was another one too.
Well, he was the first. So it does.
He was the first.
Yeah.
I was born in '66, and he was still coaching. That was his last year with the team. So I remember more as a coach with the Falcons. I remember seeing him on the sideline with the Falcons. I remember my dad telling me, well, he was the Vikings' first head coach. That's how I remember Norm Van Brocklin. But yeah, he had like the 3 years of the team's first year. They did get progressively better. And then he got them to 8-5-1 in '64. And then they started having problems in '65, where they went 7-7. Well, Van Brocklin resigned in the middle of the season. He resigned for a day, changed his mind, and came back. That's how weird of a guy he was. He resigned, changed his mind, came back. So it was, and the relationship, like I said, his relationship with Tarkenton was really bad. Norm was, he was our first head coach. What can you say about?
He also was one of the few guys to go from being a player straight to a head coach the very next year too.
I think he was one of the first.
Yeah,
I think he was one of the first.
It doesn't happen very often because at least you can go into coaching as your next year as a player, but it's usually not the head coach. It's usually a position coach,
especially back then.
Yeah.
If you think it's weird now, especially back then. I know the Rams had hired Joe Steinhauer, who was a former Chicago Bears lineman, They hired him as a head coach in the 50s, and they won a title. They won a couple of titles with him. Matter of fact, Steinhardt, who's starting quarterbacks, he had 2 starting quarterbacks for the Rams. One was Bob Waterfield, who was married to actress Jane Russell. The other one was Norm Van Brocklin.
Yep.
So
Waterfield, I know he's not a Viking, but if you ever get a chance, go on YouTube and watch Bob Waterfield highlights. You'll be amazed what that man was doing back in that
yeah,
day.
yeah, those.
I'm surprised he ever got replaced. Yeah, he was impressive.
Those Rams teams back then were probably the aerial team that you see nowadays in football.
Yeah.
Back
well, they were the Air Coryell before Air Coryell, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
And they had Elroy Hirsch, Crazy Legs Hirsch.
Yeah.
From the University of Wisconsin was their star wide receiver, but they had 2 quarterbacks, Waterfield and Van Brocklin. So
I think Van Brocklin was younger. I think that's why he replaced him.
Yeah, and but Van Brocklin he was that competitive. He had that fire. He was a competitor. So, you kind of want you're a new team, so you kind of want to bring in a coach that add some fire. But he was just like I said. His relationship with Tarkinen was probably his downfall.
Yeah, I mean, you can't. When you have a franchise quarterback, as time has gone on,
right?
The only one Minnesota has had. Even though Fran Tarkenton himself was kind of an arrogant, my S don't stink type of guy.
Oh,
still,
yeah, Fran. Don't be confused by Fran's nice. He looks like he's got a nice demeanor. Fran was a dick. Yeah. He was.
He's got that dog in him.
Yeah, literally, he does.
Yeah.
But that was that era, and Fran knew coming in as a smaller guy, they were going to be, it was open season on him, and he came to the fight. I give him credit. I give Fran a ton of credit. Fran is actually everything Kirk Cousins isn't. I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest.
Which is the sad part. The Vikings history quarterback is so bad that Kirk Cousins is one of the best Vikings quarterbacks ever. But no, Davey Chains, I saw your question. We'll get to that later because we still have a little bit to go before we get to that man. But Joe Cap was a tough SOB himself too.
Yeah, would he have fit with Norm? Who knows?
He couldn't throw really well though.
He was not a good quarterback, which is why the Vikings ended up with Gary Quazzo also, because Quazzo was actually a better passer than Joe Cap. But Joe Cap was a leader. Above all else, Joe Cap was a leader.
Something else Cousins is.
Right. So yeah, and Joe was in a Canadian Football League. I don't know if there would have been any quarterbacks that could have played for Van Brocklin. He had
because he played the position himself. So when you play the position yourself, then you become a coach. You still think you can do it better than the person you're coaching.
Right. So it's hard to say. But Norm, first head coach, a lot of our greatest players played under Van Brocklin. You go down the line: Tingelhoff, Alderman, Eller, Marshall, Larson, Winston, Kasulki. Gary played with Bud. He was drafted by Bud. Fran.
Oh, that's right. 68. He left in 67. That's right.
Fran, Dave Osborne, Bill Brown. We had Hugh McElhaney and Tommy Mason. I mean, we had a good core. Ed Schrockman. Those players helped mold the Bud Grant teams into winners. So,
back then, did the head coach have any input on who they drafted, or do you think that was more of the front office? Like, do you think that he had any say in getting drafting Tommy Mason first?
Well, you got to remember too, back then, as far as the mindset for winning football games all across the board was being able to run the football. It was a running game, so naturally you're gonna go with a running back, and Tommy Mason was naturally your first choice. If you could run the ball, you were going to find success in football. That's all levels. Pee Wee, high school, college, and pros. That was the era back then. I don't think Norm had much say in the draft. I don't think so.
Because he was 29, 51, and 4 as the head coach for the Vikings. But you got to keep in mind, 3 of those years were the Vikings' first 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's expected for him not to have a great record,
right,
as the head coach. But he was also the head coach of the Falcons after he left us from 69 to 74. And I don't think he was very good there either.
No, and believe it or not, who was starting? He had, for a starting quarterback when he was at Atlanta, he had 2 former Vikings that were starting quarterbacks. One was Bob Berry, who was a backup to Fran when Van Brocklin was here. The other was Bob Lee, who he traded for. He traded Bob Berry back to Minnesota in 73 for Bob Lee and Lonnie Warwick, middle linebacker, Lonnie Warwick was our starting middle linebacker, but when he got to Atlanta, he was a backup to Tommy Nobis. So, but yeah, I mean, he had former Vikings as a starting quarterback. I think all his years he was there. He also had he also had success against the Vikings too. I think he beat the Vikings 3 or 4 times.
That's an age-old story. Former Vikings players and former Viking coaches, when they go to Minnesota, they seem to have success. Or a quarterback who had great success against Minnesota becomes a free agent, and the Vikings are like, well, we got to sign that guy because he beat us pretty bad. Then he plays for us. It's like, what happened? Well, he wasn't as good. We just made him look better.
Yeah. You're right, Davey Chains. There was a bunch of ex-Vikings on the Falcons, and that was mostly the guys that Van Brocklin had coached. Because Paul Flatley ended up in Atlanta.
Yeah.
So
Bob Lee was a little bit. Bob Lee, I think, is forgotten about in Vikings history. He's not too many people remember him. Not too many people talk about him. I mean, he wasn't a star player, but he wasn't a bum either.
No,
and maybe because his name is just so generic. It's like Charles Smith or something like that. Maybe I don't know, but yeah, he doesn't get talked about.
Well, he got stuck because there's those 2 years where the Viking defense carried the team between Cap and Tarkenton.
Yeah,
and 70, he actually split time with Gary Quazzo, but they still put up like 335 points.
Yeah.
71 was the joke of a year for the Viking offense, and even among the team, the biggest joke was who's going to play quarterback on Sundays. Because not only did you have Lee and Quazzo, you also had Norm Snead, and that was just a problem. Bud wouldn't announce who he would play who would play QB until I think a day before the game.
Yeah,
But yeah, Lee was serviceable. He was serviceable. He did win the Mud Bowl game, but he didn't look very good against the Cowboys in the championship game. But the Cowboys were on another level that year.
Yeah,
that's the year they won the Super Bowl. Would Tommy Kramer have changed that? I doubt it, because Tommy Kramer got his ass kicked against the Raiders after that Niner game in '77. They started him the next week against the Raiders, and he looked lost. He looked like a rookie.
The reason most people think the only reason the Vikings won that Mud Bowl was because of the conditions. If it was not the conditions that it was, the Rams' offense probably the Mud Bowl slowed down their offense.
Yeah, because they had run all over us that Monday night game, and they were just running the ball. And what happened was the Mud Bowl evened it up.
Yeah,
it slowed them down.
Yeah.
But the Rams, though, for as good as the Rams were, they kept screwing up the quarterback position. They just did. I don't know why.
Did they have Gabriel then?
No, Gabriel was long gone. That was Pat Hayden.
Okay.
That was Pat Hayden. They also had they had Joe Namath that year.
Yeah, that was he finished his career with the Rams just like Johnny Unitas did, right?
Johnny finished with the Chargers.
So he did play 1 year after the Rams. Okay.
Johnny was with Baltimore for all those years, and then he spent 1 year with the Chargers.
Why am I thinking he played for the Rams? Maybe because that Charger uniform was so close to the Rams uniform.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, in Unitas' final season, the rookie quarterback behind him was Dan Fouts.
You think they waited a year too long to start him? I think,
But the Rams, I mean, at one time the Rams had these quarterbacks in Ron Jaworski, James Harris. They had John Hadel. They had quarterbacks. They also could run the ball. You had Lawrence McCutcheon, John Capoletti, Cullen Bryan. You got Wendell Tyler later. But they just, for whatever reason, Minnesota had their number. The Vikings had their number. But if the Vikings didn't beat them, then the Cowboys beat them. So.
Which is still happening today.
Yeah, it is.
So then that brings us to our next coach. And a lot of you guys are going to know this guy because he's recent head coach. And he wasn't a bad coach. He was actually pretty good. I just think he just, his style, just wore out the players. Because, he didn't say hi to Kendricks when he was walking down the hallway.
Oh, yeah, Mr. I'll throw everybody under the bus and never take the blame. Which, guess what?
That kind of wore thin with the players as well.
Yeah.
That was the one thing about Zimmer I did not like. I mean, you've been in the NFL for so long. You coached under Parcells.
Mm-hmm.
Parcells, when he screwed up, he owned it.
Yeah.
So why don't you?
Well, I also had a problem with, and I mean, there are some things you keep in-house. You don't put it out there, and he put everything out there. I mean, from what a player did this and how we're going to handle it and all, you just keep it in-house. Don't tell
I've
us.
seen him play. I mean, he ended up being right on that, but still.
Right. He came in at a good time. He did. We needed him to come in and be the coach that he was, but he was the kind of that old school coach. Now, he had a bunch of things happen that really shaped this team. The biggest what if is, what if Teddy Bridgewater's leg never blows up?
I love Teddy so much.
That was the biggest what if, because the only quarterback that Zimmer ever liked was Teddy. After that, I mean, he could care less. But Zimmer also had another problem too. On his coaching staff, he had too many former head coaches.
This is why we started the show, Morpheus.
Yeah.
There is not a show anywhere on YouTube or on TV or anywhere that has the show that we have. So we're trying to get the word out because we think this is a really good show. And more people, the youngins, Zoe, people like that, need to watch this show so they understand the suffering of being a Vikings fan.
Yeah, thank you, Norpheus. I know a ton of useless information. I'm sorry, I just do. Useless information, as my ex-wife used to call it. That's why she's my ex. But I mean, if Teddy doesn't have the injury, we don't know how this team is going. But like I said before, Zimmer had too many former head coaches on his staff, and a lot of those guys were looking for head coaching gigs still. Case in point, Pat Shurmur. I mean, you had Shurmur, you had Sperano, you had North Turner, you had, I think there was those three. There might have been others, but you had it's like too many
chefs in the kitchen.
Yeah, and it's
kind
of like
speak ill of the dead, but Sperano really wasn't a nice guy. But
I was never the biggest Tony Sperano fan as a coach. I just wasn't. R.I.P. But his coaching style just rubbed me the wrong way. And plus, I heard there was something happened. There was an incident at training camp between him and Chuck Foreman that I did not like at all.
You don't disrespect the spin doctor.
No, you don't disrespect how do you you don't respect anybody who basically put this team on his back in the history books.
Is he on? Is he in the Ring of Honor?
Chuck is, I believe, yes.
Okay, I hope he is.
Chuck
Because I know the
is.
Viking. I know the Wolves don't care about history that much. They care
No.
more about from when they own the team on.
Yep.
But someone like the Spin Doctor has got to be in a.
I believe he is on there. Um, I don't. If you, there's no way you can't have him. There's a bunch of Vikings that should be on the Ring of Honor that aren't,
Yeah.
and that's on the Wolves. But yeah, I mean, I liked the Zimmer hire when it happened. I was
Yeah.
on board with it because we needed.
He was way opposite of the prior guy.
Right. And he brought in Norv Turner to run his offense. Turner, former head coach, but Turner wanted to had that run first style of offense. He had that old school style of offense, and just when Teddy got hurt, that changed the whole dynamic of the team.
What cost us the first round pick?
Right, and that's not on Zimmer. That's on Rick Spielman, the GM. That's on.
He didn't have a suitable backup.
No, and that's on Spielman, and but as time went by, a lot of the coaching problems revolved around the quarterback position. That's the sad part. Zimmer got in a fight with Norv Turner after the Chicago game. I think it was 2018.
Because Kubiak came in 2019, I think.
Right, when Zimmer's supposedly hurt his eye. What happened, from what I understood, was he got in a fist fight with Norv Turner after the game. They got into it, and he connected with Zimmer. He cut his eye with the edge of a piece of paper, and that's what messed up his eye. But at that time, when you got Bradford here, you had two coaches that worked with him. Sperano and Shermer had both worked with Bradford, so they were in Zimmer's ear telling him, okay, we know how to make Sam successful. And Zimmer started listening to them, and he alienated Turner more, and then they got into it, and Turner resigned. That was his last year. He was going to retire at the end of the season, but he quit. He quit.
Bradford, well, you talk about, y'all think Kirk Cousins is a statue.
Oh, God, yeah.
Bradford, Tommy, what Bradford, 2 sleeves because he wore those long.
Yeah.
He wore those long, he didn't cut his sleeves on his jersey. He just kept them like regular length. Like, I don't know how he threw that way.
Well, and also, he had bad knees.
What up, Eric?
Hey, Eric.
Yeah.
He had bad knees. And actually, the Vikings had what's his name in 2017 had to save the Vikings in Chicago because they started Bradford. And Bradford was just a statue back then. He got sacked like 5 times in the first half.
Who was the backup that year?
Case Keenum.
Case Keenum, yeah.
Yeah, it was Case Keenum.
Yeah, that's right.
Keenum literally had to come in to save the team. And also what saved the team was we tied it up late in the game. Harrison Smith got a pick. So Harrison Smith gets the INT, which we're in Bears territory, and we won it with, I forget who our kicker was then. We've gone through so many kickers, I don't remember.
Was that Kai Forbath, 2017?
That might have been Forbath, yeah.
I think he got, to be honest with you, Kai Forbath got wronged. He should have, he had a good year for Vikings. When you look at Vikings history for kickers, Ryan Longwell ain't walking through that door. Gary Anderson's not walking through that door. I know Gary Anderson hurts us because of 98, but Gary Anderson ain't walking through that door. So
here's the thing: we drafted a kicker in Daniel Carlson. I don't know whose call that was. I don't think it was Zimmer's. It wasn't Zimmer's. But then he missed all those field goals in that Packer game. That was 2019.
Yeah, he missed 3 field goals.
He missed 3 field goals. One of them was in overtime.
Yeah, but if he would have made one of them, they would have won.
Right, and they, Zimmer cuts him.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, he goes to the Raiders and he gets an extension. He's the greatest kicker, and he's one of the best kickers in the league now. So, it's hindsight's 20/20, but some of it's coaching. I'm just going to say
Zimmer's record was 74, 59, and 1. But he was 2-3 in the playoffs, which I believe is the second best. Maybe third best, sorry, behind Denny Green and Bud Grant. So um, Mike Zimmer's career was not a disaster with Minnesota. It was actually quite good.
Yeah, he was successful.
Yeah. We just have fondness for the three guys ahead of him. That's kind of why he is where he is. But being the fourth head coach of a franchise like the Vikings is not bad.
Mm-mm.
You know, he wasn't awful. He wasn't. I mean, he had that one great year. I just think that he was too stubborn to change. So I think that's in the end what cost him, because he never changed his defense, and the league caught onto it.
Yeah, he was not willing to do. He was another one that I would just get mad as hell at because he wouldn't make adjustments.
Yeah,
he would not make adjustments. If you think KOC doesn't make adjustments, Zimmer never made adjustments.
Well, that's why second halves, the Vikings have a big lead in the second half. I mean, yeah, you can do the double A blitz. Which, by the way, you are the greatest person ever to do the double A blitz, but it gets teams figure it out and they get old for a while. I'm not sure about this, Davey.
Oh, with the Wilfs.
Yeah.
You know what? They were season ticket holders for so many years. They want to model the team after what the Giants did for years.
I don't know if they care about them more nowadays. I'm sure they still want the Giants
to do well,
be good, but I don't know if they care about them more than the Vikings. If they do, then they shouldn't be the owners of the Vikings.
True. I would like to know who's giving Mark Wolf any kind of advice. Ziggy's out of the picture, so everybody remember Ziggy is basically retired. The one calling the shots now is Mark Wolf.
Yeah, Ziggy's just got his name first on the ownership. That's why he's considered the main owner. But him, Leonard, and Mark, they're all equal. They're all equal.
Yep.
Partners. Lenny never says anything. Ziggy hardly ever says anything.
Ziggy's health, I think, is bad too.
I think Mark is the most charismatic of the three. That's why he's the one who always talks. Plus, I think he's the youngest of all the three brothers as well.
Yeah, Mark is.
So, but I don't know. Like I said, if they do care more about the Giants than they do about the Vikings, they shouldn't be the head coach.
No, he should.
No, shouldn't be the owners. I'm sorry.
But here's the thing. Now the Wills have so many more money-making interest, including an MLS team. It's kind of hard to.
Well, they wanted to bring an MLS team to Minnesota, but at the time, MLS said we don't want any teams playing on artificial turf. They have to play on natural grass. And then Atlanta gets an expansion team that plays on artificial turf.
I know. Yeah, I know. Do they? They don't wheel in that turf?
No, they don't. I don't think they're stadium wheels in turf. I think it's Arizona and Oak in Las Vegas the turf that gets wheeled in.
Okay.
I think Atlanta has the field turf. But they're going to change it for the World Cup, though, I think.
I don't know if they even have it here. We got a soccer stadium here.
Was it Allianz, but it's natural grass.
It's natural grass, yeah.
Yeah.
So, wow.
I don't know what the roof is at the U.S. Banking. I don't know. They could probably do grass, especially with all the stuff that's going on with the NFLPA wanting every stadium to be grass.
You could do grass.
Yeah.
Even if you put it in there for a day, you could do grass. Do like Arizona does. Arizona wheels the grass in and then takes it out.
That's the trend in almost every NFL team when they hire a new coach.
Right. Here's a problem with that. Now we're seeing it now too. They wanted to get so far away from what Zimmer was, they went to the extreme opposite side, which is O'Connell, and with O'Connell, it's too extreme. It's too extreme.
So before we get to our top three, did you want to do quote unquote honorable mention with KLC, because he hasn't been here long enough to really put him in any kind of ranking? He's trending being more towards the Leslie Frazier area, but it's still kind of too early to say exactly where he's at. Because his 1 year was, as opposed to Les Steckel, who had an awful year, his year was a lot of luck. A lot of the bounces went his way. So we are seeing this year, we are seeing more of the true KOC and how good of a coach is he really. So if he has another year next year like this year, then he will be down in the Leslie Frazier and Mike Tyson as a head coach.
I got him in. He's in Brad Childress.
Yeah,
Just because, first of all, he lied. First of all, he never called a play in the NFL as an assistant coach. So he comes up here and right away he's calling the plays.
yeah.
That was Brad Childress. And then also, I'm going to get on the Wilfs about this because of everything that went down prior to them picking KOC. A lot of that is also on the Wilfs. So he had a lot of luck last year, a ton of luck.
Yeah.
A ton of luck. More luck than there are coaches that have been coaching 15, 16 years that wish they had the luck in any year that KOC had last year.
Think about the 98 team. The 98 team had any of that luck in the championship game. They win.
What's that? What's that again?
The 98 Vikings.
Right.
The championship game was the worst luck of the season for that team.
Yeah, I knew that Atlanta was going to be tough too. But
Jamal Anderson was a beast that year.
Well, and plus, you know what? The Vikings were 15-1. They had no defense.
Yeah,
they had no defense.
And the only team that beat the Vikings in the regular season was a hybrid of the Falcons with Tampa because they had Mike Allstott. The Tampa used Mike Allstott the same way the Falcons used Jamal Anderson.
Right. Yeah.
And we only lost by 7, I think, to the Buccaneers. But
no, we lost by 1.
But they could have scored again because they had the ball on the goal line, but they kneeled the ball.
Yep. We lost by 1. We lost 28-27.
Yeah. But I don't remember the scores of games. I don't remember all those. I just know that they were the only team to beat us that year, and it was in Tampa, so it wasn't a home loss. But still,
put it this way: the way we were scoring in '98 on offense, it automatically put teams behind, and it put them behind fast. So basically, your defense is playing prevent.
Yeah.
But your only consistent pass rusher was John Randall.
And Jimmy Hitchcock made a lot of plays that year.
Yeah, and then he got beat in a very key play in the championship game.
Yeah.
He got beat. Yeah. Here's the thing with that championship game. The Vikings had like 7 or 8 injuries, major injuries to starters, that if they had played in the Super Bowl, those starters would not have played. Eddie McDaniel, David Dixon.
Kind of like 09.
Right.
I don't think Favre would have played the Super Bowl with how bad his ankle was after that game.
No. He would have been a gamer and been out there, but he would have been hurt.
Yeah.
We got beat up. They were physical. They were physical with us. But that 98 team, as much as people glorify the offensive side of the ball, which they should, that defensive side of the ball was garbage. It was.
So the next guy on our list, and I got with Yogi, but he didn't explain it to me, so I don't know how to do it. But
oh yeah,
we played the video Sunday night after the game, and we won. So Burnsy, man, you are one in a trillion, buddy. You are 1 in a trillion.
Oh, I had forgotten. I hadn't listened to that interview I hadn't listened to that presser in years. Yeah. But when I did hear it, it was always censored. I did not know he dropped that many F-bombs.
Oh yeah.
I was just oh my God.
You can't tell in the censored one because it's not just like a single beep. It's like beep.
No, there's like there was when they aired it on TV, there was like a constant beep, and I'm like, my God, what the hell?
Yeah.
And we won. That was the thing. A little bit on Burnsy. He was a head coach at the University of Iowa. Matter of fact, he had 2 former Vikings on his team. One was Wally Hilgenberg, The other one was Paul Krause. Paul Krause was his starting quarterback at Iowa. So he was with Iowa there for a few years, and then he was on Lombardi's staff in '66 and '67 as a defensive backs coach. So Bernsey actually won 2 Super Bowls with the Packers. And then 1968, he comes to the Vikings, and he's the offensive coordinator, and he stays here until he retires at the end of the '91 season.
Let me see if I can do this.
So, you trying to get the interview? You trying to get the presser?
Yeah, I'm trying to get, yeah.
Yeah, Bernsey had some pretty decent teams, but he kind of let them. There was really no discipline on those teams, to be honest. But one thing he did, he had some damn good defenses, and that was in part because of his defensive coordinator Floyd Peters. But yeah, Bernsey was a good coach. He was old school, but the West Coast offense is really Jerry Burns' offense. What San Francisco was running, what Bill Walsh was running back in the day, was modeled after the offense that Jerry Burns ran here with the Vikings. So,
yeah, there was a comment on that earlier.
Yeah, that was. I mean, what the 49ers
was it Davey or T-Bass? I think who said it. Let me go back.
Yeah,
I wish you could mark a saving. Let me go back to it.
I think I want to say Walsh did admit it years later that he did model it after what Jerry Burns was doing with the offense.
Yeah, let me see. Yeah, there we go. It was Norpheus.
Okay, right. Yeah. Actually, T-Bass, this is the one thing that the Vikings, Bud Grant was successful because Bud Grant knew players. But Bud also built a damn good defense. So he probably could have been as successful because remember, there were 2 years there where the offense wasn't very good. They bring back Fran Tarkington, which helps a little bit, but Bud and Jerry were smart enough to put together a game plan that worked with Fran's strengths. Fran didn't have a strong arm, so short passes worked for him. And that is where Chuck Foreman comes into play. Chuck Foreman being the excellent receiver that he was out of the backfield, which they didn't keep track of yak yards back then. That offense that Jerry Burns called was perfect for Tarkington and for Chuck Foreman. And yeah, there was a lot of talk about, which we'll have for another show, as far as Tarkington having input with the offense. Former Viking Ron Yeary to this day really doesn't care for Fran Tarkington because of that. That's a big, long story, too, that we'll get into. Big, long story. But, yeah, everybody says that Fran Tarkington changed his Viking team. The one that really changed his team was Chuck Foreman. That's as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, Chuck Foreman was.
Yeah.
For some reason, I still think that he's underrated in some aspects. I don't think the young people appreciate Chuck Foreman like they should.
No, they don't. The NFL doesn't. Chuck Foreman was. Everybody talks. There were all-purpose backs in the '70s. Chuck was one. Walter Payton was another. Lydell Mitchell in Baltimore was one. Franco Harris, for as good as he was not the best receiver. O.J. Simpson couldn't catch a cold. That was it. I might have missed somebody, but Chuck Foreman was like that one back that you could isolate him you had a mismatch with him on a linebacker. It was always a mismatch. So
yeah, I can't get that video to play. I don't know how Yogi did it. I tried to get with Yogi, but it is available. It is available online.
Right.
Just look up Jerry Burns in your. It's called Jerry Burns Uncensored Minnesota Vikings, and it is.
Right.
It's 4 minutes long, It is hilarious.
Here's the thing also with Burns, and this goes back to Les Steckel. Of course, Bud picked Steckel to be his successor in '84. Just before the season ended, Jerry Burns had turned in his resignation. He was leaving after the '84 season. Burns had already made arrangements to go to Cleveland with Marty Schottenheimer. He was all set to go to Cleveland. And when Bud came back, Bud made sure to bring Jerry Burns with him. I think the whole thing with the reason Grant retired the first time, it was a money thing with Mike Lynn, and Mike Lynn was being stingy. Mike Lynn was being Mike Lynn. So they probably had a little. This might have been a power play on Bud's part, but it worked. Bud comes back in '85, and he gives the reins over to Jerry Burns in '86, and Burns is there till he retires in '91. But I always found it weird that Burns didn't get the gig in '84. But
so whose decision do you think that was, though?
which one?
Not to hire Burns, to hire the awful Les Steckel.
I think it was a ploy on Bud's part because he knew Steckel was going to be bad. He knew Steckel was going to be bad. T-Bass, Ricky Young was a halfback. He was a halfback. Chuck was a fullback. Ricky Young was a halfback. Ricky Young did a lot of blocking, which I thought he was a fullback at one time too, but no, Ricky was actually a halfback.
So I had it up here.
Yeah, Chuck. I mean, we're going to have a show talking about certain players for sure. So
yeah, we already have next week's show planned due to one of our regulars. So we're definitely going to do that next week.
I do remember the Buffalo game, T-Bass. Remember it well. Saturday afternoon. I remember it well. Yep, I remember it well. He got hit in the eye with a snowball. But I mean, Burns was older when he got the head coaching gig. He was already 62, so he was up there. And like I said, I mean, he was that old school type of coach. He was, but he was the last coach.
It's hard to produce and host at the same time. Sorry.
He was that last coach that had anything to do with the old regime. He was the last one.
Yeah, I mean his overall record was 52 and 43 in the regular season.
Mm-hmm.
86 to 91, he was the head coach. He was the head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes from 61 to 65.
Okay. Yep.
And then 52 and 43 in the regular season, and he was 3-3 in the postseason.
Okay. One of the biggest upsets in NFL playoff history was when they went into San Francisco in '87 and beat the the 49ers were favored by 2 touchdowns, I believe.
Yeah. Well, they weren't running the West Coast offense then, were they?
The Niners?
Yeah.
Yes.
87.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they were.
So they got beat by their own offense?
No, the Viking defense beat them. The Viking defense beat them. That was the Viking defense for 2 games. They hadn't played that well since the Purple People Eaters, but that front four that they had in that playoff game, Doug Martin, Henry Thomas, Keith Millard, Chris Dolman, they put immense pressure on Bobby Hebert in New Orleans, and
that was 41-21, wasn't it, against the Saints?
44-10.
44-10. Yeah, I knew it was a blowout.
Yeah 44-10.
41-21 was the Arizona game in '98. That's
right.
Yeah.
And then they went to San Francisco and won 36-24. It was raining that day too.
Yeah.
But that was also the game where Anthony Carter had the game of his life.
Yeah,
227 receiving.
227, yeah.
And he also had an end around for like 28, 29 yards. He was Mr. Offense that game, put it that way.
You're right about that, T-Bass, yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Didn't they go on a run where they won like 9 Super Bowls in a row or something like that? The NFC.
Yeah, the NFC owned the NFC in the 80s. It was, I mean, the only AFC team to win a Super Bowl were the Raiders
83 against the Redskins.
in 1980 against the Eagles.
Yeah. So 80
Other
and
than that,
83.
it was
Yeah.
other than that, that whole decade, it was the Niners, Bears, Giants.
Yeah.
And up until
And the Broncos were they should never showed up.
the Broncos broke it in '97 when they beat the
Yeah.
Packers, I believe. Yeah, but up
Yeah.
until then, and even after that, it was the Redskins,
Yeah.
Giants again, Cowboys,
Yep.
and the Packers.
Yeah.
So yeah, the NFC was just dominant. They were. But it's like, and that's also the game where they lost the championship game in '87. That one hurts me more than the '98 game in '09. '87 hurt the most. Oh yes, he hated spiders.
I'm with Birdsey on that, man.
Yeah, he hated spiders. He did. I don't think he liked snakes. He was just creepy, crawly things bugged him.
Yeah.
It just bugged him.
I love snakes, but I actually had a dream one night, or a nightmare, as you would say. I woke up on the floor next to my bed, and the reason why was because I think in my dream I had a vision. There was like a tarantula on my chest. So I went crazy and I flew myself off the bed. Oh my God. When I'm awake, it's like, if you stay where you're at, Mr. Spider, I stay where I'm at. We're all good. Because the spiders are actually good for what they do in the environment. So I don't like, if I see a spider, I just don't kill it,
Right.
But yeah, no, not spiders, not for me, no.
Yeah,
I get Burnsy with that. Yeah.
Yeah, Burnsy was really creepy crawly. Burnsy was also he also liked his spirits. He liked his spirits. But yeah, he was a good coach. Yes, I remember Eddie Payton, Walter's brother. Yep, I remember him.
I'm more that's more Tony's time. My time, the kick returner, punt returner was Mr. Amp Lee.
Yeah, and it was
Yeah. Or David Palmer.
Especially Palmer, yeah. Palmer.
Yeah, those two
Palmer
guys
could do everything.
Amp Lee was the kick returner. David Palmer was the punt returner.
Yep.
Yeah. Those two guys. Yeah.
Yeah, Eddie was here for 3 years. Funny thing, and people don't realize this, Ricky Young.
I think he was 3-3, not 4-4.
Yeah, he was 3.
Yeah, he was 3-3. Ricky
Young is Walter Payton's cousin. It's Walter and Eddie's cousin, I believe. So they were related. Yeah, he was 3-3, 500 record. Got to the championship game, almost sent it into overtime. I think if Anthony Carter runs the right route, we go into overtime.
Yeah, most people remember that game because of Darren Nelson drop. But
well, and that's the pass that he dropped. That's the one that was intended for Anthony Carter.
Yeah.
And that was the problem, but yeah, I mean, that championship game, Wade Wilson got sacked like 8 times. So it's kind of, you can't win like that. You just can't.
Right. And they probably would have won that year too.
Yeah. Because they would have played Denver and they'd already beat Denver once when it came back.
That playoff game, it was 227 yards on only 10 catches.
Yep. 27-yard average, 28-yard average.
Yeah, so that's when you think about that, that's pretty impressive.
Yep.
Even today, people would gawk at that number, and
even by today's standards.
Yeah, that even by today, 49ers were 11-point favorites entering that game.
Well, the funny part was Keenan Allen just 2 weeks ago put up 206 yards on 17 catches.
Yeah.
Okay. So his passes were mostly short, but AC had 10 for 227. That's 27 yards a pop.
Yeah, so the Vikings had a 13. Here's a name, Najee Mustafa.
Reggie Rutland.
Yeah.
Yep, Reggie Rutland.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had that was I'm gonna say, I'm not sure, But I think that was the only game that Joe Montana has ever been benched without an injury. Because Montana in that 87 game was replaced by Steve Young.
Yeah.
But I think that's the only game that Joe Montana was ever benched for poor play.
Right. And then Steve Young came in and led them to 2 scoring drives.
Right. But
Yeah.
the problem was that was also the game where, rest in peace, Chris Dolman played like a madman. Him and Keith Millard all day were just harassing. I mean, they were just harassing Montana and Young. That was actually Dolman's game, where he looked like the Hall of Famer that he was going to be, that he was to become. Yeah, and Darren was one of those players that we drafted him for his receiving because he could also a very good receiver, and and that's the play. I don't know who's at fault. Darren dropped the ball, but then they also said the ball was intended for Anthony Carter. They said Anthony Carter ran the wrong route. So,
Yeah, wasn't he traded to the Chiefs, I think.
Who?
If not the next year, the year after that.
Who?
Or he signed as a free agent, Montana.
No, Montana went on and won a couple more Super Bowls, and then he got hurt in '90 in that championship game
against the Giants.
Against the Giants, and he missed Isaac Holt Norfius, and he missed '91, and he played in the last game in '92, and then he ended up with the Chiefs in '93.
Yeah.
So Isaac Holt was part of the Walker trade that wore number 30.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Bernsey, rest in peace, buddy. You were a 1 in a billion. You were a classic. You look like Burgess Meredith. You're gonna crack thunder and piss lightning. Which I wouldn't be surprised if he actually said that. So that brings us to our top 3 quarterbacks, coaches, which I think these 3. I'm sorry, top 2, Bernsey was 3. But even though as much as I like Bernsey, you can draw a line above Bernsey and below these next 2 guys, because these 2 guys are by far and away the best 2 coaches in Vikings history. So we know who number 1 is. So by deduction,
right?
We also know who number 2 is, and that is this gentleman right here. I had to find a good picture of him when he was looking young and thin and smelt. Tried to find one of him smiling, but they were all of him when he was not looking his best. So I love this man. I was a Vikings fan before he became head coach, but he made me like the Vikings even more. I'm going to take Randy Moss, whether you want him or not. I can save him. I can mold him. He was good at Northwestern. Northwestern had a history of being awful. Then he became the head coach. He took them to a good season. This man is the reason why most people are Vikings fans today, and he deserves pretty much all the credit for that. So, Mr. Green, I thank you, and I love you, man.
Yep, Denny's. I remember when they hired Denny. The day before they announced it. Now, remember, this is before internet, everyone. So most of your info was from newspapers. Sid Hartman, longtime columnist here in Minneapolis, he had a article that said that the Vikings were going to announce Pete Carroll as the new head coach of the team. And I think he figured that because Pete Carroll had ties to the old regime, mainly Bud Grant and Jerry Burns. So they figured they would stay with that program, and they would keep somebody who was one of our own, as they called it. So he has the article. I have it on good authority that Pete Carroll will be the new head coach of Minnesota Vikings. The next day rolls around, and here's Denny Green, which shocked me. I didn't think the team would hire Danny Green. I just didn't think they would. They get him here, and the first question was by Sid Hartman. The first question you hear, and he blurts out, and he yells it, and he's pissed off. Why didn't you hire Pete Carroll? And they told we just wanted to go in another direction, which is plain and simple. You know, and that's one of the reasons they did. They broke away from the Bud Grant regime, and for people like Sid, it was what's the word I'm looking for? Drastic. It was drastic. But Danny comes up here. He gets his team to 11-5. They win the division. You know, Washington got them in the playoffs, and Washington handled them in the playoffs. But Danny also brought in Tony Dungy as his defensive coordinator. So right there, it's kind of a win-win because you got the defense back, and he had the offensive line. So he just, whatever pieces he had, he put around him. Yes, there were players that didn't like him. Gary Zimmerman didn't like him. Rich Gannon didn't like him. Gannon held out in '92, then he got signed. But Gannon's play was so sporadic that he got benched a lot. Which is why Sean Salisbury ended up starting so many games. But Denny's way of doing things were not Bud's way, and they weren't Jerry Burns' way. They weren't the old school way. He came from San Francisco. And in San Francisco, if you weren't trying to win a Super Bowl, you're just a hamster on a wheel. So
and the only reason, if Denny Green would be number one probably for a lot of people, the reason he's not is because he's not Bud Grant. But when you look at his record as a Vikings coach, he was 97-62.
Mm-hmm.
So his first year, he went 11-5, then 9-7, then 10-6, then 8-8, 9-7, 9-7, 15-1, 10-6, and 11-5. The year that he got fired, he went 5-10.
Yep.
So people talk about Mike Tomlin never having a losing record. I think Dennis Green should be in the conversation because he finished first 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and he finished second 3 times. So
and Denny also did all that. Denny also did all this without a franchise quarterback.
Yes, he went through quarterbacks like people.
He went through quarterbacks and he still won. The one quarterback he had that was going to be his franchise quarterback was Dante Culpepper, but it's after they lost that championship game, there was a disconnect between Denny and Red McCombs. And then you had the whole incident with Corey Stringer when he passed away at training camp. So there was just that dark cloud over the team all year. And Denny did let a lot of good players go, unfortunately. You know?
Yeah. Well, you can say that about all the Vikings coaches except for one, T-Bass.
Yeah. Yeah. And if you say
he
it
was
about
4-8, he was 4-8 in playoffs. So
yeah. And if you say it about that one, you have to say it to him. Well, he didn't win the crowning jewel.
Yeah.
So, but and this is, and he's what we needed at the time. And he was from that 49er organization, which is the whole West Coast thing. Now, there was a whole lot of legal things that happened. There was a lot of stuff off the field that happened with Denny and the players and all that, whatever. But, and then Denny wrote the book. He said he wanted part ownership. There was always that. And, I had talked to some former columnists here in the Twin Cities, and they knew Denny firsthand. Yeah. They saw the letters. The letters were real that he received. The negative letters. I'm not even going to give them any thought, but it was real. And
humans are trash.
Right. And it just was, and it was bad. And it was also led. Now, this is where Clear Channel comes in. when Denny was hired at the year before, Minnesota had just brought in like the first all sports 24/7 station. This is the 90s. Remember, this was something
Yeah.
new. So all talk radio was brand new, but they were popping up. Well, Minnesota had their first talk radio station that was all sports, KFAN. KFAN got the rights to the Vikings. So they had the Vikings, Jerry Burns' last year. And then they had the Vikings when Denny Green became coach.
Welcome to the family, De Niro.
Well, welcome to the family. And so, and Denny's playoff record was just bad. He lost his first 3 years in the league. He lost in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And he lost to the Bears in 94.
Yeah, that was the play where Chris Carter did the sideline play, correct?
No, that was the overtime game that they won before. The playoff game was where Steve Walsh looked like
Johnny
Unitas.
Right. Yeah, so they lost to the Redskins in the wild card.
Yep.
And they lost to the Giants, and then they lost to the Bears. They
right.
missed the playoffs the next year.
Right. And then, but before, what happened was they had and the press was coming down on Denny pretty hard. They had started to the year before, the local press has started coming down on him. Well, on KFAN, the team that's carrying the Vikings, they're ripping Denny a new one. And it was some of those radio announcers that are on the station now were the catalyst leading the charge and ripping on Denny. They were just negative towards Denny. And I think it was because Denny wouldn't give him interviews when he wanted. He just wasn't, he didn't want to, he just wasn't.
So this would be what?
95.
So PA wasn't there yet.
No. PA is an interesting one too. I'll get to that one.
Yeah. He's yeah.
Yeah. And so what happened was KFAN was just so negative. They were negative on Denny. They were negative on Warren Moon, especially. Warren Moon had some legal stuff going on, and then that went on. So they were negative on those two. So they were just ripping the team. Now keep in mind their biggest sponsor is the Vikings. So Viking management after 95 said, to hell with this. You guys are just wrong. So they went back to WCCO.
Yeah.
And I never heard anybody on air apologize to Denny Green until they did a pregame show. I remember this vividly. They did a pregame show in 96 before a game, and they interviewed Denny. The interviewer was a guy by the name of Dark Star. Dark Star was the first Twin Cities sports reporter to come out and apologize to Denny because of the negativity that he received. Dark Star said he didn't deserve it. It wasn't warranted. He's always respected him. But Dark Star was the only one to ever do that.
I didn't, as people know who follow the show know, that I did not grow up in Minnesota. So I grew up in South Florida, where no one is really from Florida. Everybody's from a different place.
Right.
So the atmosphere of Florida is way different from pretty much any other state as far as getting along with everybody and stuff like that. I understand. Still in Minnesota today, it's one of us. You're from Minnesota. You're this. You're that. What is it in Minnesota that makes people do stuff like that to Warren Moon and Dennis Green and all that? I just don't know. I don't get.
They did it to Denny. I think for because he didn't get along with the newspapermen up here. Just I don't think he was easily accessible. That was another thing too. Yeah. He wasn't Burns and he wasn't Grant, where Grant was friends with Sid Hartman, and so was Jerry Burns. So they were easily accessible. Denny wasn't easily accessible. Denny would talk to you when he wanted to talk to you, and if he didn't want to talk to you, just deal with it. And I understand that completely. That had a lot to do with it, but the newspaper columnist we had at the time, okay, I'm saying names, I don't care. One was Dan Barrero. He's still on KFAN to this day.
Yeah.
One was Tom Powers, and the other one was Patrick Royce. Royce's he's kind of like the dean now with Sid gone, but he was another one. I mean, they all They were so negative on Denny. I mean, I forget who it was, but one of them called Denny Green the Idi Amin of professional football. And I want to say, I think it was Dan Barrero. It could have been Tom Powers, but they just were not. And that was, I mean, Denny, he dealt with a lot of BS up here, just press wise.
I don't get it.
Yeah, and so and he
It
had
goes back
that.
to that whole "if you leave Minnesota, you're a traitor" thing. I don't get it.
Yeah, he had
I
that.
don't.
He put together. I mean, these teams are in the playoffs. You're competitive, but once again, everybody's comparing themselves to the Packers because that's when the Packers won the Super Bowl. We're going to Super Bowls, win the division, and Packer fans were being the start of the annoying generation of Packer fans. But the teams were competitive. 98 changed everything. I got on Denny a lot because I'm a defensive guy.
Yeah.
Denny let the defense go to hell.
Yeah, he didn't care about the defense.
Yeah, he literally let that defense go to hell, and I hated that.
That's kind of he hired Fazio, right? Was his defense?
Yeah, he hired Fazio. You knew that Tony Dungy was going to get a gig as a head coach. You knew it, and it was just a matter of time before he got a gig. Well, guess what? He got hired to the division rival Tampa Bay. With Billick, I don't know how good of a coach Billick really was. Billick had that defense.
Yeah.
Billick had that defense. Every offensive coach, no matter how good they are, if they got a damn good defense, they're going to look better than they really are.
I mean, come on. Trent Dilfer won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl, people. Come on. Jeez. Brad Johnson won a Super Bowl.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, Denny, yes, Norpheus, yes. I heard the same thing about Sid. I heard the same thing.
This goes back to the young die young and the old curmudgeon live forever.
Yeah, and he damn near did.
Yeah,
he damn near did.
So that I heard his son's okay though.
Yeah, Chad was another one that was on K-Fan ripping on Denny back in the day because Chad Hartman and Dan Barrero both they had their radio show together.
Oh yeah,
and they were just mercilessly ripping on Denny Green for no reason.
Was Mike Max involved in that?
No, Mike Max was not involved. Okay. No, the only ones that were involved, there were two radio shows that used to rip on Denny. One isn't even a damn sports station. It's classic rock. For K-Fan, you had Barrero and Hartman ripping on him. You also had Mike Woodley, who had a show at the time, ripping on Denny. That was on K-Fan. I haven't even talked about the morning show on KQRS. Tom Bernard, because he was like the Twin Cities version of Howard Stern. Yeah. No, he wasn't. He sucked.
I know
he was negative towards Denny big time, and so was Bob Sansevier. Bob Sansevier was a columnist in both Minneapolis and St. Paul, and Sansevier was another one that would rip on Denny for no reason. But it was just the negativity was just it was bad. It was bad.
I don't get it.
They even somehow managed to rip on him when he was 15-1.
The whole reason I had Prime Star first as a satellite company.
Mm-hmm.
Then it switched them. DirecTV bought them out, and that's basically, as someone who didn't live in Minnesota, the one thing satellite TV does provide you is regional sports network.
Yeah,
and I think it was the Midwest Sports Channel. I think it was.
Yes, MSC.
Yeah, and that's when they all had the Viking shows. It was Mike Max, Sid Hartman, and somebody else. It was a late night.
The sports show. It was it was Dark Star.
Yeah,
and Dark Star did not get along. Him and Sid used to get into it all the time. They're both gone. But Dark and Sid used to get into it all the time. Royce was there to kind of be like to balance it out. But yeah, Sid was much older, and you could tell it was kind of hard to watch with Sid.
Yeah.
And Sid was just grandfathered in, but he wasn't. I mean, Sid and Dark Star were complete opposite, and Dark Star was not a Minnesotan either.
Yeah.
The
Well,
only one who
didn't
was
getting Garnett go through the same stuff as well?
Kevin Garnett.
Yeah.
They all have. Yeah,
Yeah.
they all have.
I don't know. I agree with that. Barrero is worse than Royce.
And here's the thing: Royce now
I don't know
doesn't
what happened
have.
to Royce's voice.
He's well, Royce's damn near 75.
Yeah.
But Barrero still has his radio show.
Yeah.
So Barrero is still on air now. Barrero talks about it now. He acts like he didn't say that. We all know he did. I mean, the players, the ones that rallied around the ones that rallied around Denny the most were those players. Those players rallied around him like there was no tomorrow, and many of them when he resigned, they're like, I'm out of here. I'm done. No, he's not. He's from Chicago. Burrow's from Chicago. Yep, he's from Chicago. But yeah, Denny was our most successful coach other than Bud. But even to this day, Denny still doesn't get the respect that he should, at least here in the Twin Cities.
Hey, baby girl. That's my niece, everybody.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah. I don't know, man. Favre was good.
He also played the Patriots.
Yeah.
He played the Patriots. Patriots were lucky to be there.
Yeah.
And the Green Bay actually had a defense.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, though, with that Super Bowl, if Desmond Howard doesn't return that kickoff,
they don't win.
They don't win.
That's why he was the MVP.
Yeah. If Desmond Howard doesn't return that kickoff, the Packers probably lose.
Yeah.
Because the Packers were making a comeback. The Patriots are making a comeback in that game.
No, Norpheus, I agree. He had warts, but what human being doesn't?
Exactly.
Exactly. The Vikings were actually, people talk about how the loyalty Vikings fans are, and we are loyal, but there was a time where the fans didn't show up for every game. And then the man's jersey who I'm wearing, and Dennis Green, they brought the Viking fans back to the table. So this is the reason why most people who are in the Viking community are Vikings fans, is because of those two, because of Randy Moss and Dennis Green, and they have to get credit for that. If you have to, as a Viking fan,
we were having blackouts. Games were blacked out, and it's usually you knew who was going to be. Every year, it was either Tampa Bay, or the Cardinals, or as some occasions it was the Bears. We had a Monday night game against the Bears, and it was blacked out. So we still had that blackout rule. Also, when Denny was here, Denny had to deal with, he didn't have an owner. He had 10 owners.
Yeah.
He had to deal with the gang of 10. There was the whole, when I talk about all the problems this team was having off the field, that was part of it. There was no real owner. So Denny really had no real boss. He really had no real boss. Who are you going to answer to? Owner number 3, owner number 8, owner number 6? I think from day to day, I think it was Roger Hedrick, and I believe Jeff Diamond had something
Jeff Diamond, I think, was the GM, yeah.
Right, but still, I mean, it was just unsettled. And even then, they were trying for a new stadium. They were still trying for a new stadium.
Yeah, Norpheus, we got one more coach to talk about.
Yeah.
But you can watch the replay afterwards when we talk about the GOAT. So, like I said, thank you for showing up, man. You always show up. So that's a lot,
Norpheus.
So we could literally have a show just on these last two coaches.
Yeah, we could.
We could. Mm-hmm. But so let's go to
the man, the myth, the legend.
And look at it. He was awesome then and now. Look at that.
Yep.
I'm surprised he has a coat on, actually. It must have been negative 50.
That's actually indoors, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Maybe
the AC was blowing too cold.
Yeah. That's actually in the stadium.
But yeah, I mean, those piercing eyes could look right through you. Uh, I mean, he is by far and away the greatest of all time. It's not even close.
No,
Um,
nowhere near,
the way he
nowhere
coached the
near.
team, the way that he coached the team, the way the teams played under him. Um, it does go back. There was a comment earlier, way earlier, about uh, Coach Grant. That I want. I would, like I said, I wish you could save a comment because they talked about Bud Grant at the very beginning of the show, and there was a trivia question for you, Tony. I don't know if you saw it. Um, Davey, if you remember that question, uh, ask it
I
again.
did I did see it.
Okay, about the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, I think it was. Um,
I think so. Yeah, I did see it. Something about they got fired or
okay, here it
hired.
is. We're going way back. This question was at 7:13 p.m.
He was also fired as an NFL HC. Who did Bud replace? In Winnipeg? Very good question. I have no idea. He is also fired as an NFL HC. Was this before or after Winnipeg?
That's the question.
Yeah. Davey, you're gonna have to give me the answer. You got me on that one. I'm stumped. Yeah, I'm stumped.
So who did Bud replace as the head coach? So I wonder if he was the head coach while Bud Grant was in Winnipeg in the NFL. Because it said Bud Grant replaced this guy at Winnipeg. So did this guy go to the NFL after he left Winnipeg and then got fired?
That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Um, yeah, because Bud was in Winnipeg for a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in Winnipeg for a few years.
Love you, baby girl. Talk to you later.
So yeah, I mean, God, I can't think of it. You know, and T-Bass coaching back then, it's so coaching back then compared to this analytic driven world that we're in now. A lot of these coaches, your naked eye told you if these guys were good or not. Now you've got coaches and general managers that rely on numbers. Everything's a stopwatch. Everything's got a number. Back then, coaches like Bud, Landry, all of them, they could look at a player and tell, okay, he's got it. He doesn't have it. He's got it, but just not with us. You could tell. You could see just by your eyes. And different era, unfortunately. Where now players are probably more talented than they have heart. Nowadays, they've got all the talent in the world, but do they have the heart? Where back then, you had a lot of guys that weren't that talented, but they had the heart of a warrior. You know, it's just different eras. And one thing
they didn't get paid like they do today as well.
No, they didn't get paid. And one thing you always heard about Bud was the word that came up with any player you ask him was respect. He had the respect of the players and so many other people, even his coaching foes had a ton of respect for Bud. Of course, not everybody liked Bud. That's everywhere. That's with every job. But for the most part, he was a player's coach. He was a player's coach. Bud did not like training camp, people. He hated training camp more than the players. They just did it because they had to do it. But Bud was not married to football. He wasn't the type of coach to sleep in his office 3 nights out of the week figuring out a game plan. Bud, 9 times out of 10 after practice, was going hunting or fishing. And that was his life. When he was football, he was football. When he wasn't football, he got away from it.
Yeah.
He didn't suffer the burnout. and he was, with today's, and you've got coaches that just live and breathe, eat and sleep football. You got to step away. You just do, just to keep your sanity. And Bud did that. Bud did it in a time when, like the Vermeils and the Maddens, they got burnout.
So basically, he was the head coach for the Vikings for 18 seasons. 67 to 83, then he came back in 89, 85. He had a 621 win percentage. He was 250. I'm sorry, he was 158 and 96 with 5 ties. So there's no comparison. He is by far and away the greatest Viking coach ever, and it's not even close. 22 playoff games. Yes, he had a losing record. He was 10 and 12, 455 win percentage. But he also does have a championship, 1969 NFL champion. So, pretty much it's hard. If you in playoff records, it's hard to have a winning playoff record. I don't think too many coaches have it, but 10 and 12 in 22 playoff games is a damn good record. 82 looks like it was the last year that he made the playoffs as a head coach.
Yeah, they were part of the they had the playoff tournament because that was a strike shortened year.
Yeah.
They beat Atlanta, come from behind 30-24, and then they lost to Washington the next week 21-7. That was the game John Riggins ran for all over the Viking defense for 185 yards. So
his first year was a losing record. I talked about Dennis Green record earlier. So 67, the Vikings went 3-8-3, and then 68 was 8-6, 69 was 12-2, followed by 12-2 and 70, 11-3 and 71, 72 was 7-7, then 12-2, 10-4, 12-2, 11-2, 9-5, 8-7. 79 was his second losing season, went 7-9, then back to 9-7, and then back to 7-9. And the 82 was a winning record, even though it was 5-4, 8-8, and then 7-9. So that's one.
He had very average. He had very average teams. He was still 500 teams.
Yeah. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 18 years of coaching, he had five losing seasons, maybe. So he's by far and away the greatest. There's no question. He's number one. He is the Vikings, I guess you could say.
No, he's the Vikings. He's when you think of this franchise, if you had a Mount Rushmore, he'd be the first one on there. He would be the first one on there.
Well, according to our list, it would be Grant, Green, Bernsey, and fourth guy would be who would we say it was Zimmer. Yeah,
Zimmer.
So Zimmer would be the one that's kind of off in the corner.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm here, but I'm not really supposed
to be
here.
Zimmer's the one they would still be working on.
Yeah. He's like, I'm here by he's like, hey,
you're kind of here by default, dude.
Yeah.
You really are. But for a franchise to only have 10 head coaches in their time, it's pretty good for 63 years.
Yeah, when you consider teams like Tampa, how many coaches that they had. I think the Texans have almost had 10 coaches since they've been in existence. So, I think it's like 5, 6, I think they're on. So, granted, a lot of that was Bud Grant because he was a coach for 18 years. But still, I think the only other team that's even close to, just a few coaches with how long they've been a franchise is the Steelers because Chuck Noll, because their coaches stay there forever. But the Packers have
recently their coaches do.
Yeah.
But before then, they've been around since the 40s, and they went through a ton of coaches.
And they were bad.
I think probably Miami.
Yeah. Well, Shula was there, what, how many years?
Oh, gosh, Shula was there 20. When did he get there? 70s?
Hi, Mom. Love you.
Yeah, so Shula, yeah. And even the expansion teams have had, my God. Bud was an all-around great athlete, T-Bass. He played He played pro ball with the Eagles. Played
Do you remember what
basketball with the
number he wore for
Lakers.
the Eagles?
It was either 13 or 76. I think it was 13. No, 50. He wore 50, I believe.
I thought it was 86, but I could be wrong.
You could be right. I think I saw one picture of him.
Yeah.
And I think, no, he wore 13 at the U of M. He wore 13 at the University of Minnesota. Might have been 86. He played defensive back.
Yeah.
So, but he also played baseball. So the guy was an all-around athlete. Yes, he did. He had that. Yeah. Yeah, lifetime gas.
I don't know who's on the other end, Pops. I thought it was Mom. Love you, Dad. Miss you too. But yeah, that's so Bud Grant right there.
T Bass, he did take it seriously, and Stu Voigt brought this up, a former tight end. The Vikings didn't have, you had the 2-week break in the Super Bowl. The Vikings actually took that week off before they started preparing for the Super Bowl. But that was Bud's style, and I can kind of understand it. It's a long season, even back then, and you're hitting from August until January. It takes a toll on on your body. You need to take some time off. I think, and people don't realize the teams we played in the Super Bowl were not, excuse my language, were not pussies. Okay. Yeah. Those are some of the greatest teams to ever walk on the field. That Chiefs team, as much as us Viking fans thought we should just go in there and dominate that team, that defense the Chiefs had was no joke. They were not. And they put it to us. But we only had a week to get ready for that one. But that Miami team was great. They knew how to beat us. You run right at Alan Page. We were close with Pittsburgh. We were very close with Pittsburgh. There was some questionable calls by the refs that cost us. But that Raiders Super Bowl, we were just older. We should have been there in 75. I still say if the Vikings are in the 75 Super Bowl against the Steelers, the Vikings win. I think they beat the Steelers. But they were a year older when they played the Raiders, and just, Also, let's be honest, Brett McClanahan fumbling that football at the 1-yard line against the Raiders took a lot of steam out of this team. It did. It took a lot of steam out of them because the momentum was all theirs.
Yeah, that was 75, even though it was the year that I was born. That still hurts for a lot of people because the push off.
Oh, it still hurts for me. And a lot of those older players, they'll tell you, Paul Krause said it for years, that 75 team was the best team they had. It was even better than that 69 team. And the way that it ended, and there's a whole conspiracy thing there, because honestly, there were a lot of people that didn't like Bud. And many of them were on the competition committee, namely Shula and Schramm. They didn't like Bud. So, a lot of rules and stuff, they kind of changed to get back at Bud. For years, Bud wanted to have the 2-point conversion. He wanted the 2-point conversion in the NFL. Who kept voting it down? Dallas and Miami. And they had a lot of pull. So there was always that gamesmanship.
Yeah, it was. Like I said, I was only able to see maybe his last couple years as a head coach because, being born in 75 and then, not actually living in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. So I had to get my news from afar. So it was kind of, I wasn't in it with Bud Grant, but being a Vikings fan and understanding the history of it, the only year I really remember would be 85,
Right.
because
And-
he took over after Les Steckel. So, so he was before my
Right.
time. As far I know the history from reading about it and watching videos and stuff like that, but physically seeing it with my own eyes. No.
Well, and I should say the reason Bud retired the first time. Bud was in the 84 was technically the last year of his extension that he had signed of his contract. He wanted an extension. Bud wanted an extension. Mike Lynn, the GM, was not going to give him an extension. Mike Lynn was like, you know what? Let's wait and see how you do in 84. And then when that season's over, we'll figure out something. Bud's like, no, I want an extension. Bud played hardball. Bud played hardball with Lynn. And Mike stood his ground. Well, Bud said, you know what then? I'm going to retire.
Yeah.
And he did. And Bud probably knew that Steckel would fail. And so, Bud's probably like, you know what? And Bud was smart. Bud's like, yeah, they're gonna call me at the end of the year. They're gonna want me to come back. And he probably wouldn't have come back if Mike Lynn, I'm sure Mike Lynn asked him, and he probably told Mike Lynn to shove it. But the one that did ask him was Max Winter.
Yeah.
And at that time with Steckel there was the big threat of blackouts. That was a big thing in the NFL.
Yeah.
Blackouts. And so you just got this new stadium, and then it's going to be half empty because it started being half empty with Steckel as coach. And right away, Bud could never say no to Max Winter.
Yeah.
Could never. And so what happened? Here he came back, and he got to keep the boat that they gave him. He still got his office. He got free gas, and he could retire. He could get the team back to respectability, which is what he did which is what he did in 85. He brought the team back to respectability, and he handed over to the right guy who should have had in 84, which was Jerry Burns.
And if you guys want to know more about Max Winter, our very first episode is about the inaugural season of the Minnesota Vikings, and Max Winter is a big part of that show. So if you want to know more about Max Winter, go ahead and check it out.
Yep. We talked about Max.
Yeah. So what do you like this comment, Tony?
Oh, that's very true. Oh God, what preseason game was that? Yeah, Bud did it because it was preseason, but Bud would actually run up the score on Shula teams in preseason. He really would. We played 77. We played the Dolphins. It was a Monday night game, and you swore it was a regular season game. The way that Bud and Jerry Burns were calling plays, they were running up and down the field on Miami. He did not like him and Shula did not get along.
There was respect to Shula being on the competition committee.
On the competition committee, yep, yeah. There was always respect, but they were that generation. They were competitive.
Yeah, like I said, growing up in Florida, man, especially when the Dolphins are good, it was hard to see any other team.
Yeah,
because the Buccaneers were so bad that no one talked about them in Florida.
No.
They just talked about their uniforms. That's all they talked about.
And I'm going to tell you something. I think the reason the Buccaneers ended up in the NFC Central Division, and I think that was probably George Halas has something to do with it, because you could schedule games for Florida in like November, December when it's cold. You'll have one warm weather game.
Yeah.
And I think that's what they did.
Plus, they probably needed a patsy.
And they needed a patsy. But then all of a sudden, they got better than the Packers and Lions.
Yeah.
It's like they never, it was kind of that whole thing. There was a lot of backdoor deals and handshakes and eye winks in the old NFL. Yeah. There still is nowadays, but now everything gets reported. Back then, if you found out about it, was a week later, 2 weeks later, or
if it was or never.
Or never. Yeah.
Yeah. What was it? The old story about Bud Grant with the players leaving training camp and the police?
Oh, forgot. Okay. Okay. Nobody liked training camp. So when training camp was over, it was a party. Bud would call the Minnesota State highway patrol. He would call them in the local jurisdictions. Bud would tell them, you're going to have a few speeding cars going up 169, leaving Mankato, heading for the Twin Cities. Those are my football players. Camp ended today. So they're in a hurry to get the hell out of Mankato and head back to the Twin Cities, because at the time, Mankato had nothing. It had nothing. It's better now, but it had nothing. It was just barren, undeveloped land. And it was such a big thing. Vikings defensive end Jim Marshall. Chuck Foreman tells the story. Jim Marshall would stand in the parking lot as the players were packing up and getting ready to head out of there, burning rubber out of there. Jim would stand in the parking lot shooting off all his guns. And
celebration.
And Chuck was like, we thought he worked for the CIA because he had every gun known to man, and he would disappear for 3 months out of the year after the Super Bowl. You didn't talk to him. You didn't hear from Jim from January to probably April. But that was the way it was back then. Bud was the same way. Once it was over, and Bud, and Bud had that type of pull. He called the highway patrol and told them these cars are heading to the Twin Cities. So those are football players. And back then it was, like, okay, yeah, we'll know.
Yeah.
It was just that type of thing. But yeah, hell, Bud was probably leading the charge. Once training camp was over, then Bud could really go fishing.
Yeah.
He could go fishing.
So Marshall probably disappeared together.
Yeah. And here's the thing. Bud was close with his players. You talk about what Zimmer did, and then what we went from that to O'Connell, what he's doing now. But Bud back then, they had a couple of players that he would go hunting with and fishing with. And like I said, that all goes back to respect. The players respected him. And other NFL teams respected Bud. Matter of fact, a few people know this. Dave Casper was an all-pro tight end and a Hall of Fame tight end with the Oakland Raiders. One year, the Viking coaching staff coached in the Pro Bowl. And in that Pro Bowl, where you have the players talking everything, Dave Casper had talked to Bud and asked him how he could come to the Vikings. He wanted to come to the Vikings. And Dave was actually from Minnesota too. But he wanted to come play for Bud Grant and the Vikings. And he said, can you guys work out something to get me to Minnesota? Well,
is that tampering?
No. They do it now. It's even worse now. Hell,
is that considered tampering though?
It should be, but yeah, tampering is such because it happens so much.
Yeah. The legal tampering period.
The legal tampering period. What, you have a season for tampering? Come on.
Yeah.
But it's like, even then you had, he wanted to come to Minnesota. And he was a Raider. You just beat our asses in the Super Bowl, but you want to come play for us. That tells you a lot right there. And he wanted to play for Bud. Yeah. Which he finally did, but it took 3 years because he ended up getting traded to Houston.
Yeah.
Before.
So, but T-Bass, the 70s were awful for the Central other than the Vikings.
Yeah. That one, the Vikings, they lost the division of 72 to the Packers, and then the 79 to the Buccaneers. In between then, it was theirs. What does that tell you?
Yeah, 2 Ironmen.
Yeah, exactly. And those, I'll tell you what, when Bud came to the Vikings, he had those veterans that he leaned on from Van Brocklin. One was Marshall. Marshall was his guy. The other was Tingelhoff and Grady Alderman. Those were the guys that he leaned on. When Bud came here, he had a good nucleus of players. He did, left over from Van Brocklin.
The problem was Van Brocklin was such a bad coach until Brace.
Yeah, Van Brocklin was such a bad coach. And Bud, he was 3-8-3. He had some growing pains. The players had to get used to Bud too, because first of all, Bud wasn't that loudmouth, fiery, cuss you out every chance he gets that Van Brocklin was. Bud was basically Van Brocklin was Zimmer, Bud was KOC. So you had to go from one extreme to the other, and the players didn't know how to navigate it.
Now you're not comparing KOC's coaching career to Bud Grant. You're
Oh,
just
for
comparing
God, no,
You're just comparing their personalities for people out there.
just the personality. No, yeah, exactly, right.
I don't want people saying, "No, Tony just compared KOC to Grant."
I compared
it will happen.
Yeah, and I'm comparing the situation for those that don't understand it or try to misinterpret it. God. Jeez. Yeah, T-Bass, Page, and Grant didn't see eye to eye years later when Allen had lost so much weight. It was his weight loss that caused it, and they changed the defensive scheme also on Allen. So Grant didn't like the fact that Allen had lost.
But he was like 230 something, wasn't he?
No, not even. When we cut Allen, Allen was like 220. Alan Page was about 221, 222. We drafted him at 265.
Yeah.
And his all-pro year, he was 245. So he had lost a lot of weight.
Which is still remarkable, even though they're not as big back then as they are now.
Right.
Still.
Well, Mick Tingelhoff, we said this before, they had him listed at 237 to 240. If Mick was 230, I'd be shocked. I don't.
And unlike the center we have nowadays, he doesn't fake back injuries.
Exactly.
Oh, look at that man across from me.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
Anyway.
Exactly.
So another great show this week. We didn't see her in the chat tonight, so I wonder where she was. But
Sarah, where's Sarah?
Yeah, I didn't see her in the chat, but she gave us a great idea for a show. So we are going to go ahead and we are going to do that next week. I'm looking for the notes now that that she sent. I think you have the message too.
Yeah, I sent you a message too.
Yeah, let me see. But we're going to go ahead and I can't remember if it's in the chat with Yogi or if it's our own personal chat.
It's in our chat with Yogi.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in our chat with Yogi.
Okay. Yeah. So we are going to do. So our next show next week is going to be history of the first draft pick of a draft for the Vikings. Not the first pick, just their first pick in the draft.
The history of the first round picks.
Yeah. So whether they were a bust or
Yeah.
So we all know there's some great ones out there like Gary,
Page, Eller, guys like that.
And then we also have some busts, but we'll get into that. So that is going to be our next week's show. And we also have another show this week. I'm not sure if it's tomorrow, Thursday. We haven't figured it out yet, but it's our bi-weekly show, Status of the NFC North. So we will put that show out there. We'll figure out a time. You guys go. Those of you who subscribed, if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe so you get the channel update. But I think this was another great show. I love doing this show because, like I said, there's no other show out there that does what we do. You may get an episode of a guy talking about a certain part of history or trying to shove the whole Vikings history in like a 2-hour. But we spent 2 hours tonight just talking about the head coaches.
Yeah, we spent an hour talking about one coach.
Yeah. So and it wasn't even the greatest one.
And it wasn't even the greatest one.
Yeah. So I say this was another awesome show. I love doing this show. And like I said, I know a lot about Vikings history, but like I said, I'm the Reader's Digest version. You're the full encyclopedia. So I appreciate everything you do. I enjoy doing this show with you, and I can't wait till next week.
I'm excited for future shows, and I would love input from the viewers. Yeah. What would you like us to talk about? What part of history?
As we're proving, we're doing Sarah's idea next week. So if you guys see Sarah before we do T-Bass, I know you see her a lot. Just let her know that we're doing her idea because she wasn't here today. She wasn't here tonight. So let her know that if you see her, that we're doing her idea on this show next week, so she can stay tuned. So if you have an idea, T-Bass, go ahead and shoot us. Let us know. Anybody watching Spiking Viking, Davy Change, or the Northeast is gone. But if anybody has an idea for a show about the Vikings history, we'll try to fit it in.
Yep, we will. There's a lot of history with this team on and off the field.
It's good and bad.
Good and bad, and
Yeah.
some indifferent. But it all ties in. A lot of NFL, a lot of Minnesota. There's just a ton of subjects to talk about with this team.
Well, until next week.
Skol Vikings, let's win this game. Skol Vikings, honoring the name. Go get that first down, then get a touchdown. Rock 'em, sock 'em, fight, 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 fight. Go Vikings, run out the score. You hear us yell for